muchinyumba tonsefe abale tafuna kumpembeza mulungu watu koma nkati mwaife cha mulungu mulibe otakulisa chabe zinga ilibe nchito otakulisa chabe zinga ilibe nchito talowa muchinyumba tonsefe abale tafuna kumpembeza mulungu watu koma nkati mwaife cha mulungu mulibe otakulisa chabe zinga ilibe nchito otakulisa chabe zinga ilibe nchito Atwa mulungu, atwa mulungu, atwa mulungu, atwa mulungu. Vakunena timati oti wa mulungu, koma ngati mwaife cha mulungu mulibe takulisa chabe zinga ilibe nchito, takulisa chabe zinga ilibe nchito. Atwa mulungu, atwa mulungu, atwa mulungu. Atwa mulungu vakunena timati oti wa mulungu koma nkati mwaife cha mulungu mulibe takulisa chabe zinga ilibe nchito takulisa chabe zinga ilibe nchito.
In December of 1958, two families, Paul and Wilma Nichols with Paulette, and Galen and Rowetta Osborne with their children, Glenn, Terry, Paula, and Linda, who was 3 months old, left New York City, headed for Blantyre, Africa. We were on the ship, the Queen Mary, going to Southampton, England, where we would catch our other ship headed to go to Africa. So we will be there in London for a few days, waiting for the other ship to leave. So this is on the Queen Mary, and that's the crow's nest, they call it. And you can hardly see them, but there's Terry and Glenn with Paul down between the two stacks on the ship there. And there were some other pictures of the stacks. They call them the smokestacks on the Queen Mary. This was our stateroom. We had bunk beds on both sides, so we put the kids in the bunk beds, and then we had the bottom ones, and we all stayed in the same room. This is they call it the bridge of the ship, where the captain drives the boat, steers the boat. It took us 5 days to cross from New York to Southampton.
How were the seas?
It wasn't too rough. It was kind of choppy, but not too bad. We really hit a storm after we left London, but this was pretty stable. This is at Cherbourg, France. It's a fort that's built out into the ocean to help protect the coastline. This is another picture of it. Now, this is when our ship was in at Southampton. It was the docking area for the Cunard Line, and that's where they took care of the ship. Now, this is down in London. There are several pictures that I didn't get to go on the sightseeing trip with Paul and Galen and Wilma, but these are the pictures that they took of London. There's the Towers Bridge. And that's Parliament buildings and Big Ben across the Thames River. This is Paul at the Trafalgar Square, and there were pigeons everywhere. Trafalgar Square has a huge statue on there of about one of their naval heroes, and it's not too far from Buckingham Palace. And it was just down the street from the hotel we were staying in. There's another picture of Big Ben. This is a picture of a bombed out building that happened during World War II that had not been rebuilt. And that's another picture of it. That's a picture of the Trafalgar Square, and then the statue is on top of that. It's another picture of London. Just, the Parliament buildings. It's one of their double-decker buses. And those were taxis. And that's the Piccadilly Circus, they call it. It's a lot of lights and advertising, and it's just kind of a show place there in London. I believe that first sculpture is that the Trafalgar Square, and then the second one is a Queen Victoria statue, and that is also Buckingham Palace in the very back. That's another picture of Buckingham Palace. And the little things that look like telephone booths, those were places where there were guards stationed around the palace. This is a picture of number 10 Downing Street, which is the house where the Prime Minister lives. This is in a park that was close by the palace.
So that's two guards on horses with a guard standing in between.
Yes, I didn't get to see this, but this was they called it the Queen's Gate, and these were mounted soldiers, and it was going to be the changing of the guard, they called it, and there'll be some other pictures of that there. That's those. They were on horses, and they have a really tall, fuzzy hat on, and they called it the changing of the guard. It was a big ceremony they did every time they changed the soldiers, changed positions.
And that's them sitting on horses. They're in those little buildings on the front.
Yeah. And that's called the Queen's Gate. There, over there. And there's the soldiers on their horses. Yeah. Now this was we left London on the Kenya Castle, and it seemed like we left in the evening, and it was on Christmas Day. We were in the Bay of Biscay, which is along the coastline of, I think it's Spain and Portugal, and it was rough. That we would go way down, and our porthole would be below water, and then we would come up real high on the wave, and that's what we could see out our porthole. And it was just about half of the people on the boat got real seasick. There's a boat on the horizon in the distance, another ship. But it was really rough water. And the next morning we came to the Rock of Gibraltar, which is the entrance to the Mediterranean Sea. And it was sunrise. We anchored out in the away from the shore, and then we had to get on a smaller boat to go ashore. And there's their dock where we got on the smaller boat to get to go to the shore. And this was a horse-drawn taxi service. Now this, I'm not sure. We went on in the Mediterranean Sea, and this was one of the ports along the coastline. I'm not really sure which one. I think this was in Genoa. I'm pretty sure it was, because there was some Army naval ships in the background there. Yeah, this was in Genoa, Italy.
So if you look to the right, there's looks like a battleship of some sort, some type of a army
ship
that's docked there.
Yes.
It's gray.
And Paul and Wilma and Galen got to go on a sightseeing tour And Wilma and Paulette is in the back of that first bus. They were in the very back window, and Paul was taking a picture of them, and Galen took a picture of Paul. I stayed on the ship with 4 little kids. This was a statue to Christopher Columbus. This was where he was from. And there were some statues there of honoring him. And that's one with all 3 of his ships were, I can't remember all the names of them. The Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria.
Yes.
Is that one?
So this is like a memorial to that.
Yes. This was in a little fishing village called Portofino, Italy, and Galen and Paul, they got, I think this was on their tour, got to go through that. It was just out of Genoa, little fishing village. Now this is at the port of Said, Egypt. When we were at the entrance to the Suez Canal, and they were having some kind of a big ceremony there that morning. This is at sunrise, and they were supposed to, some dignitary was there, and they had a ceremony going on. And this is at Port Said, Egypt. Now we're in the Suez Canal, and in the center of the canal there is a bypass where there's a convoy of ships coming from the other end, and we meet in the middle, but there's 2 passageways, and we are passing each other. And this is the Suez Canal. This is at Aden, Arabia, it's in Yemen now is the name of the country. It was a duty-free port, and so Paul and Galen were looking for cameras and things there because we wouldn't have to pay duty on them. And we were there shopping. The man that's standing on the left side of the picture wanted to be our helper, and we kept telling him no, we were okay. So we took a taxi from this area up to another area that was up on a high mountain area where there were shops. And when the taxi got up to that other area, this man got out of the trunk of that car. He was going to be our helper. Very insisting. This was in Mombasa, one of the ports that we stopped. And this is another, Paul and Galen did another sightseeing tour, and there was another ship in the harbor that was a sister ship to our ship of the Kenya Castle. And so we were there several days because they were unloading cargo, and then they were loading cargo from ship to ship out. of Mombasa. I think this was the sister ship to our ship as it was leaving. But they looked just alike. And we also took a small boat down the river here to just for the day to see, and we'll see that in a moment. In fact, we were on that ship, on that little ship. Now where I took where the picture was taken. That's Paul. And see, they were using those big cranes to load stuff into this ship. And see, that's where they were putting it down in the bottom, the hole of the ship. This was there in Mombasa. This at that Fort Jesus, they called it. It had been a fort at one time, but now it was a prison. And these were just people that they just kind of lived in that area. And this is they were cooking their dinner. Now that's at Fort Jesus, they call it, but it's a prison now, or was at that time. Paul and Galen were trying to take pictures of how they built their houses, and there was the one that was under construction, which is they just take poles and tie them together and build their walls. Then they make mud and plaster them, fill in the holes and smooth it out and make plaster. And then they use the grass for roofing. You will probably see no people in the pictures other than like Paul there, because those people were superstitious. They thought that if you took their picture, that you took their spirit. So they didn't want anybody taking their pictures. This is the picture. Well, that's how wide the streets are. And this is a market. The craftsmen bring their carvings and whatever they make to sell to people. They have vegetables and some areas too. This is a sisal field. They use those leaves, the leaves off of those plants to make the sisal rope. And there's a picture of how they twist the sisal there on the left side of the picture. And that's part of it. They stretch it out in between and then they twist it. That's where they strip the leaves and then dry them to make the sisal rope. Oh, that's one of the machines that they twist it with. There's a fishing boat. Most of the fishing boats are just hollowed out logs. these fellows, they were all old fishermen, and they liked to have their picture taken. That was the most beautiful water. It was so blue. It was so pretty. It was in a river that came in that, I don't know the name of the river, but it was just right off of the ocean. It came into the ocean there. There was a little fishing, but you could see a lot of these. They call them dhows or something like that. They're sailboats. And this is the little boat that we hired and took a little tour down the river one day.
Is that you and Wilma sitting there on the back?
Yes, we've got everybody on there, yeah. There we are. Galen got a picture of Paul with his camera. They're working with him. The fellows were going to show us some hippos, but we never did find them. So I don't know. That looks like a tugboat pulling another boat there. And there's more fishing boats. We're still on that river, so. Okay.
Put the piece of paper down.
Oh.
Thank you.
This is on the Kenya Castle. This is a family. They were going to Blantyre also, and he worked for the English government as a agriculture superintendent of some kind. And he worked with the Africans. And we got acquainted with their family, and so they were friends and people we could visit when we were there in Blantyre. This is at Beira after we got on the train off of the ship, and that was a trip going up to Blantyre, and it was an overnight trip, and there was just some African boys standing there by the train and watching us. So I took their picture. I think that's another picture of the train. And this is there in Blantyre. we were going to a ceremony at a new building, and the Queen Mother was there. That's her with the governor of Nyasaland in that car in the back. That was Queen Elizabeth's mother, and we got to see her there. That's Wilma with the hat on there, and Paulette standing in front of her. And that ceremony going on. Yeah, that's another picture of them in the car. This is a plane that came into the Blantyre Airport, and I'm not sure who was coming in. Because we got to see Macmillan when he came in, but I'm not sure which plane this was. This was a small airport. It was still for the prop planes. It wasn't for the jet planes. It was too small for that. This is a different airplane. Okay, this one is at Salisbury when the Queen Mother came to Salisbury, and we got to see her there also. And this was her plane coming in there. And this was the automobiles that came to pick her up, and that was for the Queen Mother. Oh, this was the day we left to come home from Blantyre. We were at the airport, and this was after we had got our house, and they were standing on a box that covered our generator, which gave us light at night. There was a cord that was running from it to Paul and Wilma's house, and a cord that ran to our house, and it would only hold a gallon of gasoline. And so when they ran out of gasoline, we all went to bed. And that's how small Linda was. And the little house that's out under the tree, that was our outhouse. So, and they were building a storehouse, a building there. That was that was our house. That's the house we lived in.
Was that Paul and Wilma's just behind it?
Yes, that was Paul and Wilma's house on the other side there. That was a Sunday after church.
But that's Paulette in there.
Yes, that's Paulette and Paula and Glenn and Terry outside of our house.
That's the one that's got the metal roof on it, so that's.
Oh,
Paul and
that's
Wilma's house.
okay. Then that's Paul and Wilma's house. Then it has a metal roof. Ours had the grass roof. That mountain behind there is Mount Cherazulu, which was there was a big Catholic hospital up there on that mountain, and so your dad was taking a patient up there one night, and him and Sam, and they saw a leopard in the middle of the road.
Sam who?
So, what?
Sam who?
Samuel Pendani. Yeah. That was he was Galen's translator and kind of the right-hand man. And there was some African dignitaries that came to visit, and that's one of them sitting in the chair there. They came on bicycles, and they enjoyed watching our children. That was our generator. Still there. There's your Galen, and I think Bennett Severe, and then those other two men, I don't know what their names are. They came there to visit. And that was our watchman there on the one end. It's, he'd stay there at night to make sure nobody was messing around. That's him again. The fellow sitting down was the dignitary, and he rode the bicycle, but another fellow pedaled it, so he just sat on the back. So but each district had they call him a DC, a district commissioner, and they had to make sure that they had to check out the church and make sure everything was going okay. And had to put their stamp of approval on it. This was early in the morning. Every morning there would be a group of people that wanted medicine. And Galen and Paul weren't doctors, but they could give them aspirin for their headache, or Pepto-Bismol for their stomach, or bandage their sores. And that's about all we could do, unless they were really bad, then we would have to take them to the hospital. But there were always people out there wanting medicine in the mornings. And that was our van that they bought at the beginning, but that's the van that Galen was filling with gas when he caught fire. That was Galen in the red shirt with the PEF helmet on. That's a queen ant, the termites. They would build huge ant hills, and the Africans actually ate them because they were big. They were actually termites, but at certain times of the season, they would have wings, and they would go out with a lantern or a lamp at night, and they would come out with the wings, and they would catch them, and they'd pull the wings off of them, and then they'd fry them, and they actually ate them. But that's a queen bee, a queen ant, I mean, not a bee. And that's a chameleon lizard that's on this, off of the leaf there. This is Paul and Wilma's house. And they had the metal roof on theirs, but it made it very hot inside from the sunshine. But it was very nice. This is when they were building the bricks for the new church house. There was a big hole there that they made, and people would bring water and put in the hole, and they would make the mud and make the bricks, and then they'd stack the bricks and let them sun dry. And then they finally would build a big stack of them. I don't remember what they called it, and then would fire them and burn the bricks and make them stronger. And they built the church building from those bricks. And this was where the boys would come and take the chairs from our house to the schoolhouse for church. But then we could sit where we could have chairs to sit down. But this was outside of our house. And those are our houses in the back. And then this is the hole where they were building the bricks. That's Samuel Pendani and his wife, and they were expecting a baby. And the baby was a little boy, and his name was Galen. And Samuel stayed with Galen, Galen. He was his right-hand man when they went anywhere, because he could speak English. And we built them a house there close by our house. So that was a new building. These were African craftsmen that worked in ivory with the elephant tusks, and which they're not allowed to do anymore. But at that time they could. I think Paul bought one of those tusks and brought it home. This was the church there at Windy Windy, and they met in that schoolhouse. And there was no chairs for the people. They just sat on the floor. They brought chairs from our home for us to sit in, but they all sat on the floor. And the women sat on one side and the men sat on the other side of the building. And this was when they had a big meeting there, and they came from all over the country. This was just the women, and they kind of built I think they called it a tabernacle, but it was just had grass roof over the top to kind of make a shade for the people, because that sun is pretty hot. Well, that's a picture of the church people again. They're at the schoolhouse. And this was the men that came for that meeting. This was at a different church. It was out in the country somewhere. And that was Brother Severe standing up there by that pole. And there's a piece of metal hanging there on a rope or something between the two poles. And when it's time for church, then they'll bang on that and make a bell. And then people know to come and sit down. And that's Brother Severe with his arm up. I guess he's trying to get their attention. This was at a baptizing. Yeah. Because there wasn't very much water there, and there was a kind of a little pond. And so they did the baptizing, but it was very shallow. So the people that were baptized had to sit down, and then one of the African preachers did the baptizing. And the black umbrellas were not for rain, but for the sunshine. They'd made it to keep the sunshine off of them because it would be so warm. That's Wilma there in the red dress. She's with the other ladies out there. I think they were watching the men or something. And this was just the African preachers. It was at a baptizing. Or African men, I should say. And I don't know how many were baptized that day. There was quite a few. This Samuel Pendani was sitting down there, holding Linda. But this was while the baptizing was going on. I think I took the pictures. That's the big fig tree that was by our house, that there in the back. It's kind of a landmark. And that fig tree is still there today, but about half of it's broken off. It's gone. Oh, this is when Macmillan came. He was the Prime Minister of England. And since this was an English protectorate, then he came. But Africans were wanting their independence, and so they were kind of fighting among themselves, and there was a big group of African army, a group that were protesting, I guess, or giving their opinions about things, that were wanting their independence from England. And that's Prime Minister Macmillan with the hat on next to their governor of Nyasaland. And then that's the Nyasaland army out in back, on the back behind them. That's the plane he came in on. And so, but that's Macmillan there. And I don't know how Galen got so close to him because he was just taking pictures. This was at the end of school, and Brother Severe was kind of the school superintendent, and he wanted Paul to talk to him and have him like their graduation speech for the end of school. And so that's who all this is. It's all the school kids. There were 3 teachers in that school, and there was a whole bunch of kids, but each group has their own teacher with them, and they're doing their kind of a dance of some kind and demonstration show for their parents to celebrate the end of school. And Paul was giving a speech to him. And that was the church building in the back that wasn't quite finished. They were putting the roof on it. But they hadn't finished the roof yet. But that's the new church building. The government over there looked toward the churches to have the schools. The church did not support the schools, but they would help organize it, but they didn't put the money into it. But
who's that?
That's Linda and Paula. Yeah. And there's Galen, that's the kids. The box where the barrel is on top of it, that was our gasoline. That's where Galen got burned. He was filling the car with from that barrel. That was before your dad lost all of his hair. Now that's his shirt that he'd had on when he got burned. Wasn't very much of it left. Paul and Wilma and Paulette.
And this is after you moved.
Yes, we were living in Limby at this time, yeah. I think this was taken at Dr. Royer's house. And this is when we went down to Salisbury and we stayed in this little motel. It was a motel I don't remember what they called it, but they had a dining room where we ate. And that was figured in with our price of our room. So, and this was a dam that was on a river outside of Salisbury. There was made power. It's a snake farm that we went to, and that's the snakes that the fellow was working with, and that's a cobra there. Those were the biggest lizards. That's a crocodile. Those marks are a foot apart, so you can tell. That way, you can tell about how big it is. That's Salisbury, which is Harare now, since they got their independence. That may have been the hotel we stayed in. I don't remember. It was a very modern town. And that's Paulette. That was our house that we lived in Limby, or just out of Limby. It was a very nice house. It was 3 bedrooms and a bath, kitchen, and Linda. That's, I think Paula had already gone to sleep. It was in our living room. And we brought those chairs home. I wish I still had them.
Glenn, Terry, and Paulette.
The kids, they played with them so much that they finally tore them up. I guess Glenn was 5 at that time. Or he was going to school, so maybe, let's see. It was just before he turned 6, I think, at 60. I don't remember. So. Yeah, Paula fell asleep on us, and I guess Linda was already in bed.
Linda. Paula. That's Glenn.
Yeah, that's Glenn.
Terry.
And that's Terry. And that's Paulette. And there's Linda. That was our little kitty. She was a little white kitten. And his name was Sam. And his dad was the one that kind of helped me with the washing and the ironing and cleaning and stuff. That big old straw hat.
On Paula.
Yeah, that's Paula. That was the house that we lived in, and that's the right around the corner of the house was the garage, and that's where Dad backed that Volkswagen bus out of the and around the corner and pulled it there in front of the house, and that's when he ran over Linda, knocked her down, but the wheels didn't go over her. It just knocked down, and we don't know where she got her concussion, was from the car hitting her or where her head hit the driveway that caused the concussion. But it was right around that time. She was, what, 18 months old? About that
Now,
one.
Sam, the idea was that Sam was supposed to teach your kids some of the language there?
Yes, the little boy Samuel. We thought he would maybe teach our kids how to talk Chinyanja, but he was talking real good English when we left. Yeah, that was the neighbor's house just below us there. And that's Paul and Wilma and Paulette. And that's Ralph and Kay Royer. We named Ralph after him. He was a Seventh-day Adventist doctor, but he's pulled Linda through when she almost died.
Now, what happened there?
That was when, on our trip over there, they took on bad water on the ship at that Aden, Arabia, and she was I fixed her formula from that water, and it wasn't boiled good enough, and it didn't kill the bacteria in it, and that gave her dysentery, and she couldn't keep anything down by mouth, and then she had diarrhea real bad, and she almost died.
And where did he live?
But it was when we got there that we called and talked to them. We found out from the Africans where a good doctor was, and they told us about him, and so we got a hold of him and went to his clinic there in town. And they had a hospital at their mission, and they took her out there and took everything by mouth away from her for 24 hours because she couldn't keep anything down. And then they started giving her a saline solution on her back, right under her skin, and it would just make a big old bubble on her back, and then she would absorb that to keep her from getting too dry. And then the first thing they started giving her was yogurt, a little drop of yogurt, and it stayed down. And so then they started giving her more yogurt to help build up the good bacteria in her system. And so she got okay. He was also operated on Wilma when she was there. She had a tumor in her abdomen, and he was able to take that out and took care of her while we were there. They were really good people.
Did he have any part in Dad's recovery after his fire?
He came to the hospital but he didn't take care of Dad or anything with Dad's burns. The English doctors that were there at the hospital did that. But he came and checked Dad. I mean, he came and checked on him and was there to see him and or anything. This was one of the Sunday school preachers that was there and was going home. I think they had several kids, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I guess, 5 children there. That was Ralph and Kay and their 2 children. They went to school in South Africa, and so that's why they were there. We came to see them off to school because they were going back to school. That's John and Samuel.
That's the Royers and their kids.
And then that's the family that was all with us on the ship, and we met them. And then this is at the Blantyre Airport. We went for a little vacation up on Monkey Bay, and this was a little cabin that we stayed in on the lake. It didn't have any windows in it. There were just kind of screens that were over the windows because it was just nice and warm. If you got a breeze, then that made it cooler in the house. This was a boat that took the mail and supplies around the lake, and it was on Lake Nyassa, and that's in Monkey Bay. That's on that lake. Those were fishing traps. They would put them in there, and the fish would somehow go in them, and then they couldn't get out. And they would. But this is a boat that was just a hollowed out log that they used to go out, and they kind of fished with a net somehow or another, and those traps. That was Linda sitting in that boat. That wasn't very wide. And these were just some kids that were down there pretending to fish. They liked to get their picture taken. That's Mount Melange that we could see from our houses there. But we drove up there one Sunday afternoon. And the Africans were kind of afraid to go up there because they said there was a man up there that would turn into a lion and eat you. So, but they found out that was just an old wives' tale.
And that was the Volkswagen that you guys got later.
And that was our microbus. We had a full bus when we went in up there. A full load. There was a rainbow, so it had a little shower. It was pretty country. And that's all of our. It was Brother Severe, no, Bennett. I think it was Bennett with us, and Sam and his wife came, and John and little Sam Samuel and the yard boy to cut the grass. He came with us. And this was a river that came down off of the mountain. This was the only water that we could let the kids get into and play without being contaminated, because it was up there where the Africans hadn't gotten into it, and it was still clear water. Don't get your pants wet. But the next thing they did was fall down in it and get all wet. This was the airplane that we came from Belgium back to the United States, or back to New York. Yeah. No, wait a minute. Yeah, it could have been, there's another one that where we would. This may have been in New York, going to San Francisco, because we had to wait, and we were on standby. And but this is in Brussels. That was a sister that was from Stockton, and she was friends with this lady in Belgium that was a member of the church, that she had church in her home. We got to go on a little bus tour, and these were pictures of the area around Brussels. That building had still holes in it from when during the World War, that were where they'd gotten shot. That was the little bus that took us on that tour.
That's the War Museum behind.
I think this was I was waiting for the next. I think this was at a cemetery, a military cemetery that we had stopped at.
Okay, might be a few more.
Yeah, see, there was one of them, because there was a big building on one of them, and then the other one, the building was the shape of a star. It was at the Battle of the Bulge, but this was a military cemetery.
So you can see some are crosses and some are the Star of David.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's just amazing. I mean, that was such a huge cemetery. This was one of them. We saw two different ones, and I can't remember the name of this one.
Oh,
But this one was the Battle of the Bulge.
like this one.
Can you read it?
Each for his own memorial earned praise that will never die, and with it the grandest of all sculptures, not that in which his memorial bones are laid, but a home in the minds of men.
Uh-huh.
And that's Paul down there on the left.
Yes. And Sister Brumfield, that was from England, or from Stockton.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And this was in the shape of a star, and there was the names of the whole the United States on the top of them and all the way around. This was an empty castle, an old castle. And there had been part of it that had been used in recent years because it had electricity to it. But most of it was just open, a vacant building of rocks. And those walls were thick. The place where there was a grate down on the bottom there with those rocks on it was their well. It was water. I think this was the little town of Luxembourg, because that's a very small country, and but each one had a castle in it and a big church building. It was mostly Catholic. This was a park that we went to. This was in the town of Burgoyne or something like that. It was, this was an American tank that had been shot with, and it had blown up inside. So there's stars around it, shows where the bullets went in. Inside there, and it was during World War II. This was the American thing that was built for the World's Fair when it was in Brussels, Belgium, and it's supposed to be an atom, the shape of an atom. And there were restaurants in those round balls, and there are elevators in between them, or escalators. And that was the end.